everybody. Welcome to Education Now, sponsored by the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I want to welcome you, whether it's the afternoon, the evening, the morning, maybe even the middle of the night, wherever you're coming in from. We're happy to have you here with us today. My name is Francesca Purcell. I am Senior Lecturer on Education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I think I'll just give us a few more seconds for folks to come on in. I see the numbers ticking up, which is wonderful. We are really delighted you could join us for this really important conversation. All right, well, I'm going to start us because every second is really valuable. So today we are going to take up an especially complex yet fundamental topic that every college and university is grappling with. Maintaining a culture of free expression while also striving to provide inclusive and respectful learning environments for all. Students, faculty, staff, administrators, presidents, boards of trustees all play important parts in negotiating and navigating through these waters. And I'm so thrilled that we have three very thoughtful guests today to share their thoughts and experiences with us. And we also want to hear from those of you in the audience, and we'd love to hear your questions near the end of our discussion. You can submit those during our conversation by using the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You will also find closed caption access there. So let's get started by welcoming our guests. So I'd like to welcome Erwin Chemerinsky, who is the Dean of the University of California, Berkeley's School of Law. I'd like to welcome Linda Livingstone, who's President of Baylor University, and Bharat Anand, Vice Provost for Advances in Learning at Harvard University. So again, three of you, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. So Erwin, I'm hoping I can start with you. And let's anticipate that our participants have a wide range of expertise and knowledge about free expression on college campuses. So can you please set the stage for us by providing context about the key, legal underpinnings we all need to know about this issue of free speech?
Sure. I want to do two things. First, to talk about the basic principle of free speech. Then second, briefly talk about its relationship to the university's obligations under Title VI and Title IX. With regard to free speech, I'd make 4 quick points. The first is to remember that the First Amendment applies only to public universities, but other sources of law require that private universities at times respect freedom of speech. The First Amendment, like all rights in the Constitution, apply just to the government. But there are other things that require that private universities comply with basic notions of rights. For example, faculty and student handbooks usually provide a protection of free speech. They're deemed a contract with individuals, and if the university breaks that contract, it can be sued. Some states like California have laws that require that private universities follow the same speech principles as public universities. Second point, the core of free speech is that all ideas and views can be expressed, period. Under the First Amendment, under principles of free speech, there are no ideas or views that can't be expressed just because they're too offensive or too objectionable. Third, freedom of speech is not absolute. We all know the famous words of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, "There's no right to falsely shout fire in a crowded theater." Well, there are categories of speech that are unprotected. Speech that incites illegal activity is unprotected. And there is a legal definition of what must be met to be incitement. Threatening another person, what's called a true threat under the law, is unprotected. Harassment is unprotected. But you'll notice one thing that I didn't list in the category of unprotected speech, and that's hate speech. It may surprise you to know that in the United States, hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, unless, of course, it becomes incitement or true threats or harassment. In the early 1990s, over 360 college universities adopted hate speech codes. Everyone to go to court without exception, was declared unconstitutional. And fourth, I would point out that colleges and universities can have time, place, and manner restrictions with regard to speech. Even when there's a First Amendment right to use government property for speech purposes, it doesn't mean that it has to be available at all times for all manner of speech. And thus the rule has long been on a public university, there can be time, place, manner restrictions. Those rules have to be content neutral. They can't allow some viewpoints to be expressed, not others. They have to leave open adequate alternative places for communication. And so, for example, many universities have rules that say there can't be demonstrations near classroom buildings while classes are in session. That's a time, place, manner restriction. Many universities have rules restricting speech in dormitories, evenings, and nighttime. It's a time, place, and manner restriction. Many universities adopted rules over the summer prohibiting encampments on campus. Again, likely constitutional as a time, place, and manner restriction. But if I had to say four things that everyone should know about the First Amendment, it's that the First Amendment applies only to the government. Other sources of law might protect freedom of speech in private universities. All ideas and views can be expressed. There are categories of unprotected speech. And finally, time, place, manner restrictions. There are two, in the second part of my remarks, I wanted to talk about two very important federal statutes. Title VI, that says recipients of federal funds can't discriminate on the basis of race. And this includes that they can't tolerate a hostile environment on the basis of race. And Title IX that says educational institutions that receive federal funds can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And this too means that there can't be a hostile environment. This creates an affirmative duty on the part of the university. Last May, Catherine Lehman, then the head of the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education, was clear that even speech that's protected by the First Amendment can create a hostile environment under Title VI or Title IX. That doesn't mean that the university can prohibit speech if it's protected by the First Amendment. The legal standard is that a university can't be deliberately indifferent when there's a hostile environment. And Lehman outlined some things a university could do. It could be university leaders condemning the speech that creates a hostile environment. It could be providing physical protection for students, providing emotional support. It could be providing trainings. But it's important to recognize that even speech protected by the First Amendment can trigger Title VI and Title IX. And the key then is the university can't be, quote, deliberately indifferent.
Erwin, thank you. That was really helpful in sort of setting us up to sort of, again, sort of on the ground, trying to navigate these, really, I think, challenging yet so important ways of understanding around free expression on campus. Linda, let me bring you in. You've spent a lot of time under the Council of Independent Colleges project on free expression. You have put out a number of publications. Tell us about that work and tell us a little bit about how you've seen this playing out on campuses, these tensions.
Sure, Fran. Well, it's a privilege to be here, and this is such an important topic on our campuses now. So I have been a part of the Campus Free Expression Project since it really began its work in 2020. So we started during COVID, but we've sort of continued that work and updated it most recently in 2024. And that project really included individuals from all kind of aspects of campus life. And we talked about what is free expression? What does it mean? What are the challenges to it? What are the things that sometimes come in conflict with it on our campuses? And then how do we seek to navigate that? And we tried to provide really practical guidance to presidents, to trustees, to faculty, and to student life professionals, because those are the people in some ways on the ground that are dealing with it most regularly. So just a few things that came out of that, and I think everyone's going to have the link to the resources where they can look at all the reports in great detail. But one of the things that came out of that, it kind of goes to some of the things that Erwin said. It's really important on your campus that you know what your perspective is on free expression and academic freedom, and that you have policies in place around that your practices around it are consistent with your policies, and that the board and the administration are on the same page on where you are so that when something does happen on your campus, everybody's kind of reading from the same playbook in terms of how they're going to deal with it and to respond to it. And it's really important that your campus understands the perspective on free expression and academic freedom on a campus. And it's not just what you say about it, it's the actions that you take to support your policies and to support free expression on your campus. I think the other piece of it that came out, and this really applies across all groups, is how important helping people who are kind of on the ground know how to engage and facilitate conversations around difficult issues to try to ensure that they don't lead to situations that can cause students to feel like they're being attacked in some way, and that they learn how to have these difficult conversations. And that can be anything from the training we do with our students, even as we bring them in with freshmen, to help them know how to engage in these kinds of conversations, how to express themselves in healthy ways, how to respect others that are expressing themselves on something they may completely disagree with. Helping our faculty and staff that engage with students to know how to facilitate these conversations and how to help students to have those kinds of conversations. And then one of the things really practical that we talked a lot about was, how do we help develop case studies, tabletop exercises that we can use with our students, with our faculty and staff, with our boards of trustees, our boards of regents, so that when these situations arise on our campus, it's not like we're seeing them for the first time, that we have sort of practiced how we're going to deal with and respond to these situations. It's easy to read a list of guidelines and rules and to say, this is what you should do. But, when it happens in the moment, and it can be really heated and serious on a campus, you need to have done some things where you really have practiced the behaviors and the actions that you're going to engage in the moment when something's going on your campus. And these things can bubble up at any moment unexpectedly. And so that's why you have to really be proactive and be prepared, even though you may not have something that you're dealing with on your campus at that moment. But it was a great exercise. I certainly learned a lot from it. We certainly hope that it's big helpful to those that have accessed the work that we did.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that. And actually, that leads in perfectly to Bharat, what I'm gonna ask you about, which is if you wouldn't mind sharing about the work you've been doing, chairing a task force entitled Enabling Difficult Conversations. So I think that sort of picks up where Linda started going. And how has that, tell us about that. What are the lessons learned? And for our participants, what are some of the important things that you would like to share with them?
Yeah. Thanks, Fran. And again, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's an honor to be here. I'll just pick up on what Linda said and Erwin said. So just in terms of what's been happening on our campus, probably similar to many other campuses, this conversation actually started formally about 2.5 to 3 years ago. And it was partly in response to just a recognition that we were hearing from various members of our community, students, staff, faculty, about their reluctance to express views. And so there was a small task force that was appointed by, at the time, President Larry Bacow. And I had 3 colleagues from Harvard College, the law school, and the Kennedy School who were part of that. And we engaged in the process of discovery, just trying to understand what was happening. And a few things emerged. The first is these concerns were widespread. They were not limited to 1 or 2 schools. They affected all the schools. The manner in which they were expressed was somewhat different across the schools, which was interesting. They were not restricted to students expressing these concerns. Faculty and staff expressed similar concerns. And they were not limited to in-classroom concerns about expression. It was also about out-of-classroom expression. So in other words, take that first point as this is an issue. I think a few other things emerged which speak to what Erwin and Linda was saying. I'll just add some nuance. The first is, while we often think about sort of the problem at the core as protecting and defending and defining the right to expression, actually, as it turns out, I think one of the issues that emerged was slightly different, which is self-censorship, meaning more than protecting the right to expression, it's trying to encourage those who don't feel that they can express themselves. And that self-censorship is voluntary, but it's pervasive and it has many layers. And part of the question is, you can ask the 5 whys. Why is this happening? It's a fear of conflict. It's a fear of losing status. It's a fear of reputation. It's a fear of harm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that was one issue. And I think that in some sense is probably the defining issue facing our community, which is how to prevent self-censorship. The other is, and Erwin started to touch on this, the distinction between freedom of expression as a right versus a responsibility. And this is where the context of the university comes in, right? Free speech and academic freedom are often conflated, even though they are slightly different. Academic freedom ultimately is the mission of the university, which is what we all do, trying to create and disseminate knowledge and the pursuit of truth. But that also means respect for the dignity of others. It's not just the what, but the how. And the distinction, I think, becomes manifest when we start thinking about rights as individual rights, but academic freedom is also a public good. And those two issues are often conflated. This starts to get into the time, space, and manner restrictions that Erwin was talking about. But I think it's deeper than that. And I think just trying to understand what this means on a university campus is actually quite important. That work gave rise subsequently to a more formal set of task forces set up by the Provost and the President last year. One was trying to really look at this notion of institutional neutrality and what is the role of the institution in preserving or avoiding taking a stand, and what are those boundaries. And the second is, really sort of where we are today, which is the Open Inquiry and Constructive Dialogue Task Force, led by 2 colleagues, Eric Bierbaum and Tomiko Brown-Nagan. And they published a report as well last year, which we're now in the process of implementing.
Thanks, Bharat. Well, let me take a pause, because each of you just sort of put out quite a lot, and see if any of you want to sort of respond or pick up on any of the themes that someone. I see Erwin like shaking his head. Go ahead, Erwin.
No, what I wanted to do is amplify what Bharat just said, which is so important about the relationship between freedom of speech and academic freedom.
Okay.
Academic freedom protects faculty in their expression, in their teaching, their scholarship, and their dissemination of ideas. And it is crucial, I agree, that to the mission of a university. But it's also worth thinking about what's the relationship between academic freedom and freedom of speech. I would describe them in a Venn diagram sense as overlapping circles. There are some things that are protected by freedom of speech in the First Amendment that aren't going to be protected by academic freedom. If a professor over a weekend goes to a rally and attends a controversial rally, that professor at a public university has the First Amendment right to do it, but that's not academic freedom. And there's some things that are protected by academic freedom that aren't protected by the First Amendment. At a private university, the First Amendment just doesn't apply, but private universities are still committed to academic freedom. And there's some things that are protected by both the First Amendment and academic freedom. If a professor at a public university were fired because of the content of the scholarship, that would violate both the First Amendment and principles of academic freedom. The thing that I would also emphasize is just as free speech is not absolute, nor is academic freedom absolute. Academic freedom is governed by professional standards. So if we assign a professor to teach contract law, and the professor protests and says, I don't want to do that, I'm going to just teach sports, we can discipline that professor because it's not safeguarded by academic freedom. It's not by professional standards. A professor of geology might have a First Amendment right to say that the earth is flat, but academic freedom and professional standards wouldn't protect that.
Great, thanks,
I
Erwin.
wanted to pick up on that.
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you weigh in, Linda, and then we have a number of questions coming through that I'd like to raise with you. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, I wanted to pick up on the comment about self-censorship, because I do think, especially with our students, it can be a huge issue on campus. And of course, there's a lot of concern that there's ideological bias on university campuses, and it can go either way depending on what kind of campus you happen to be on. And so I do think part of what we have to work on our campuses is helping our faculty and our staff know how to create an environment where students feel like they can say what they believe and have conversations around their views that allows them to learn and grow and develop and to think critically about those ideas. And if they're not willing to express these opinions and these views, it's really hard to help them learn how to grow and develop their ability to articulate an argument, to think critically, and so on. And so I do think that's part of our responsibility, is to help those who are on the ground with our students, our faculty and staff, to know how to create an environment where students don't feel like they have to self-censor. And I think it's a really important role for us.
Mm-hmm. So we have a few questions coming in, and let me sort of summarize a couple of them in I think one. The essence of these questions is that how as campuses do we not sort of go too far over the line of preventing free expression or allowing free expression that is going to sort of move into the area of a hostile environment? Like if maybe there's too much censorship against freedom of expression, and how do campuses sort of can they more effectively walk that line?
If I understand the question, it's campuses have to create an inclusive learning environment for all students. I said, if they don't do so on the basis of race, national origin, often religion, it violates Title VI. They don't do so on the basis of sex, violates Title IX. But generally, at least for a public university, the way to do that can't be by prohibiting speech. We can discuss, as a matter of normative philosophy, whether hate speech should be protected, but it is under current law. So the response of at least a public university can't be to stop the speech. It has to find other ways to create an inclusive learning environment.
Great, thanks, Erwin. We have another question here, and this individual would like to hear your thoughts more about institutional neutrality and the tensions that may emerge between that stance and the institution's choices when governing freedoms on campus. So, and I can't remember, was it Bharat? You brought up this position of institutional neutrality. Linda, I see you shaking your head. Would love to hear some of your reflections on that.
Sure. Linda, please go ahead and I'll add.
It's an interesting conversation because there's been a lot about it recently, kind of around higher ed, because of the way some things have played out in recent years. And so there are universities now that have taken formal positions of institutional neutrality, that they are not going to speak in to some of these controversial federal or national or international issues. I also saw an article recently that I think it was one of the folks from one of the Catholic universities that basically said, if we aren't going to take positions on these issues, who's going to? We have a moral responsibility at times to take these positions. So I don't think this is a settled issue on campuses at all. And I do think different institutions are going to take different tacks on it. On our campus, we talk a lot about, does this issue have a direct impact on our campus? And what level of impact does it have? And then should we speak into it or not, based on how it affects education broadly and then our campus more specifically? But I think we're all kind of struggling a bit and having conversations on our campuses about when to speak up and when not to, and when is that appropriate and helpful versus when is it not helpful to the situation. But I'm sure others have their views on this as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, Fran, to what Linda is saying. I mean, I think the tension arises precisely because you're trying to protect speech and freedom of expression. And part of the challenge is, if the university or university leaders take a stand on any one issue, that in some sense is signaling to those who might have differing opinions that that is basically the prevailing view. And so you might, in fact, encourage self-censorship as a result. I mean, a lot of this went back to the Calvin principles that the University of Chicago sort of, crafted more than half a century ago, and I'd encourage everyone to read that. And, one of the lines in there, which is actually quite powerful, is this notion, getting to Linda's point, that there's a lot of folks in a university, individual faculty members, individual students who can in fact speak up and be critics. But the university is the home and sponsor of these critics. It's not itself the critic. And I think maintaining that balance is obviously, I think, what we want to aspire to. It is hard in practice, I will say this. I mean, we just issued the task force report last year, and it's a living and breathing document, right? You know, when do we actually say something as a university leader? What does leadership constitute? Is it head of a department? Is it head of an institute, an initiative? So I think these are, as Linda said, sort of, I think, tough questions.
Where I think I had something that's different is that silence can be a message too. And for me as an educational leader, I'm always asking myself, would my silence be the wrong message under the circumstances? So certainly I only want to speak out if there is a relationship to my campus. But I spoke out after the death of George Floyd. As a dean of a law school, I spoke out after the insurrection on January 6th. And I think to have not done so would have been the wrong message under the circumstances.
Yeah, these are, well, let me do one more question, then I'm going to ask all of you, you can start thinking about this, because believe it or not, we're coming near the end of our program, but just one or two things that you would encourage folks who are trying to, again, manage these tensions on their campuses, you know, one or two things that you would very much like to guide them towards. Believe it or not, we have a number of questions asking about the role of social media and whether or not, like, how you think social media is playing into these tensions. So let me just put it out there because it's come up a few different times.
Happy to say something succinct, if not. So there is no question. I think there's a correlation, Fran.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is, you know, if you and I said something to each other 25 years ago, which we didn't like, it was gone into the ether. Today, any comment is viral and durable and repeatable. And I think that's what creates this tension in a sense.
I do think it's one of the places we have to help our faculty and staff and students understand, not to censor them on what they do or don't say, but help them understand when they do say something on social media, the implication. I think especially for students, and we talk about it with our student athletes because they're pretty high profile. You know, you can say what you believe about these things, and we want you to speak up, but you also need to be aware of what some of the social media consequences of that could be, that can frankly be really hard on young people's mental health and their self-esteem and their well-being. So it's a huge part of it that amplifies these issues far more than we ever used to see, and something that we do have to be aware of on our campuses.
So I'm happy to kick off, Fran, with your question.
Sure.
Quick answer to your question.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you what doesn't work. Simply asserting the right to free expression doesn't work. Initiatives that are perceived as one-off often fade out. You need, to Linda's earlier point, sustained initiatives that actually create a culture. And oftentimes we open up conversations on campus, but that can be followed by self-selection of participants. And one of the things you find is that often doesn't work. There's a couple of things. One is, I just want to underscore what Linda said, which is creating this culture. That's a living, breathing thing. That doesn't go away. It's not a problem to be solved or a checkbox to be checked. It's something we're literally living every day. Commitment has to come from the very top and from everyone else. But I'll tell you one thing that we're finding actually interesting and useful is that there's a lot of variation on our campus in terms of those who are able to deal with this effectively and those who might be able to deal with it less effectively. I'll just give you an example. Roughly 45% of our students say that they find it hard to express views, but we have certain courses like Michael Sandel's famous justice course, where when you look at the survey results in that course, 90% of students say they feel perfectly comfortable expressing themselves. Mm-hmm. How can we exploit that variation? We have 3,000 faculty at Harvard. How can we exploit that variation to learn about what's happening effectively so that we can teach and inform ourselves? And that's one of the projects we've been engaging in, which is having faculty actually surface these issues as they confront them in the classroom. These are real. They help us try to understand contextual boundaries. They make us vulnerable, but they also allow us to literally share these ideas with each other. And I think that's really powerful, meaning not look at the campus as one unit of analysis, but as 3,000 units of analysis.
Thanks, Bharat. Go ahead, Linda.
My one sentence is we have to model what we say we believe in this space as leaders of our institutions, our trustees, our leadership teams, our deans, our faculty, because if we don't model what we say we believe about free expression on these issues, then it's not going to become embedded in our culture. So we have to live out what we say we believe.
Great, thank you. And Erwin, go ahead.
I would agree with all that, but I think it's so important for campuses to have policies set in advance. This can be major events policies, policies for the use of campus facilities. Also, going back, we talked a moment ago, the importance of having principles of community. Even though they're not enforced, they can certainly set the tone and make clear, just because you have a right to say something doesn't mean you should say it. And we should hope that people will always treat one another with respect and even kindness.
Well, Erwin, I can't think of a better way to end this conversation. So I want to thank all three of you for being here with us and sharing your insights, and for the good work that you're doing on this incredibly difficult but so fundamental, important topic. So thank you so much. And for our participants, thank you so much for being with us. There'll be links to many of the resources that Linda, Bharat, and Erwin mentioned, and hope to see you next time on Education Now. Thank you so much.